Cities are making us ill.
Mental stress.
What about nature?
What can architects do, right?
I'm not demonizing it. Many times they don't thrive.
It's a message of hope. Hello everybody. Hi. Can urbanization and nature truly coexist? So we are very fortunate and happy to have here with us today Dr. Diana Benjumea. Could you introduce yourself, share a little bit with us what you do?
I'm actually really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Okay, a little bit about myself. Let's say that I'm an explorer. Okay. I'm a global citizen.
Singapore is your second home?
And Singapore is my second home for sure. I've been living in Singapore for the last 6.5 years, and I'm always mesmerized by this country, by people, by all the new things that emerge, and especially when we talk about nature or coexistence with nature and urban context. I started as an architect. Along the line, we began to talk about sustainability and climate change. So I'm talking about like several years ago. Not too many, but no, yes, it's been a while. And then exploring a little bit more how we can truly embrace the idea of sustainability in architectural design. And let's say that the path that unfolded was just to go to the root cause of many aspects that not only could trigger a design that is more consciously conceived for sustainability, but also that is careful with the environment, right? So it all comes down to the idea of how to be conscious with the natural environment and how architecture and buildings and cities coexist.
You also a professor in one of the university in Singapore. What makes you want to teach?
I wish I was a professor, not yet. Currently I'm a lecturer at the SUSS, Singapore University of Social Sciences. And how did I start with the education part? To be honest, it came to me. I remember I was having this conversation with someone.
You want to teach?
Precisely.
Okay. What kind of question?
I completed my PhD in the UK, in the University of Nottingham, where I had the opportunity to, actually, I came to Singapore while I was finishing writing down my PhD thesis. So my partner received a job offer to work as a postdoc student here. And he asked me, Diana, I'm going for a short period of time, 1 month. Will you like to join me? And at that point, I've never been in any Asian country. And I was like, wow, but I'm writing my PhD thesis 1 month. Okay, well, why not? Let's do it.
Bring your laptop and go.
Yeah, correct. Did I bring my laptop that time? I don't know. If I bring it, believe me, I didn't open it because I was just mesmerized by Singapore.
How was it when you first time arrived at Singapore Changi Airport and started to see the city?
You know, my jaws, they were hurting because I was all the time, can this be true?
Is this a jungle or a city, right?
Well, yeah, because you see flushing nature everywhere, right? So it's, the UK has really beautiful parks and so on and so forth, but here we have a tropical weather, right? Which is very similar from where I am from, right? I'm from Colombia, so it's a very tropical country. So it was like, wow, you have a heavily urbanized city that is blushing with this beautiful nature all around. The parks are marvelous, just the environment is amazing. I couldn't believe my eyes. As an architect and urban designer, I was very intrigued by how Singapore made it in such a short period of time, with limited resources in a way, right? And how it grew to be what it is now, right? I remember I made a list with my friends back then. We were all doing PhDs in architecture or sustainability, and then they were, okay, Diana, you are going to Singapore. Oh my God, this is a list of buildings that you have to go. And I was
buildings.
Okay.
What are those buildings?
Park Royal.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was one of them. There, I think around then as well, it was one of the Thomas Heatherwick's buildings. Thomas Heatherwick is a British architect, which I look up to. His work is really, really inspiring. And he designed a building in the NTU. And I just needed to go and chase those gems. What we were trying to call it back then is conscious design, right? So how do you design inspired by nature, right? So in the case of Park Royal, for instance, I think they integrate it all, right? To the point that nature in the building is very evident, right? It's everywhere. But they also took inspiration from directly abstracting shapes from nature into the design of the spaces, even the interior space, the terrain, exactly. I remember sharing the fact that Singapore constitutes, if not one of the best examples in the world, because it's not only, it has achieved such a level of development that has grown in tandem with the notion of having nature side by side, which is very rare. You see, if you take a look at how other countries have developed, I think if you have traveled around, Singapore, I guess, the way it's positioned around the world, as I was saying, is remarkable, because it's not only a city in nature. It started with a garden city, as a garden city back in the time, 1960s, and now it's a city in nature.
It seems to me that, then we need to work with nature, or rather nature plays a bigger role in how our cities would look like in the future, right? Same for trained architects or urban planners or designers. That seems to be then a shift in how much we can influence, right, that state, where so can we really decide how much nature that can be in a city like Singapore, or is left to nature, right? So where do you see?
Wow, Kim Ming, thank you for that question. It's a very very interesting question, and it shows that you're very reflective. Back to the idea of human-centric design, right? I will say that ideally, if we can find a balance in which we also allow nature to grow naturally, that will be ideal. But we also know that it's not as simple, especially when you have a highly populated city. The amount of interference with nature, that's what we should be aware of. Like, not overly interfering with the biological processes that go along with nature, the ecosystem. Sometimes we see parks that are overly curated.
The other time, there was a time that I managed to visit SIT for their new campus in Punggol. Yeah. So they were working with great architecture like Woha, So Woha loves plant, right? So they say when they plant this tree, they must plant it somewhere else, and it makes sure that they have some kind of like a, it looks like it's camouflage, So it's part of the whole thing. But I like the concept that, they plant it somewhere and they make sure that this tree is somewhere else within that zone, So.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good example you're sharing, and we can find a balance between those. So we do see buildings that are making a great effort. So for instance, if you take a look at I don't know if you've visited the NTU University, the new Gaia building.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay, it's one of the net zero buildings that pretty much integrates natural environments inside. But I'm going to say that sometimes the problem is not so much enabling those, let's say, I call them containers, plant containers, but our direct interaction with it. What you see sometimes is that many people feels bothered, not the consequences, but what nature brings into the space, right? So can you guess what will
nature bring to the space?
Like what will that be, for instance, if you open a space and you plant trees or small trees and little plants? The first,
because sometimes could be the roots.
Okay, roots is one, but
or certain animals.
Correct.
Monkeys.
Insects.
I'm thinking about monkeys.
Monkeys as well, but this is more on a larger scale, I would guess.
The birds will come in.
Pollinators, exactly. Birds, and not many people, some people actually might be allergic, right? to some of these new organisms. And it could be a problem, right, in the interior spaces. So one solution that unfortunately might not be the healthiest one is to use pesticides. But when you do that, you are also affecting the biological integrity and the, let's say, the macro and microbiota of the ecosystem itself, of the biological diversity. So in a way, it becomes a little bit forced for these organisms to live.
So I heard that I think as a city nation, Singapore has done quite a lot, right, in this space of, you know, urban planning, designing to coexist with nature. And I think a lot of cities out there, I think they are using Singapore as a role model for that, for sure. But on an even larger context, right, I mean, there are studies, global warming, climate change, some say it's irreversible. So does it matter on the grand scale of things?
Really changing. But I just focus on my own actions, and I just focus even thinking on those generations that are yet to come and perhaps won't be able to enjoy and appreciate nature as we do now. Yeah, Singapore is small, but as you also said it very well, it's setting up an example worldwide. So how remarkable it is that such a small country is doing so much and is becoming a role model in sustainability. Man, I think the bigger countries and the bigger correct. And wherever you go, wherever I go abroad, and Singapore comes to the topic, we can have this conversation, and people really have that very deep appreciation towards what the country is doing. And I'm saying it at a nationwide scale, because it's not only the government, but although we know that is pioneering all of these green agendas, but it's also how citizens integrate so well with those notions, especially the younger generations as well. Sometimes even if one day you, instead of take away or dabao, you just bring your own container, that's already a huge contribution. And you see one person doing it, so
everybody will start following, right? Because it's like community influence each other and so on and so forth.
And in Singapore, it's very tight, like the communities are very...
So it seems like education play a role in influencing, inspiring, right? You know, students and the younger people on, you know, being conscious about the carbon footprint.
Correct.
But how about like ordinary Singaporeans, right? Could be young and old, could be my mom that is used to carrying plastic bags. And
what would you recommend them to do?
What could inspire them?
I answered this with my own personal experience as well. I guess with my parents-in-law, they live in the UK, and my family, well, I have family in many places around the world, but those that live in Colombia, sustainability and recycling was just still a very abstract thing a few years back. But then they will see me talking about sustainability. Don't buy this kind of products. I turned vegan, vegetarian a while ago as well. And this was a huge, nearly 10 years ago, and this was a huge move. And as soon as I did it, of course, a lot of criticism came from family. Why? Why are you killing yourself? Why? What is this? But then
do you eat to live or eat to live? Do you eat to live or live to eat?
Correct, right? Exactly. Fundamental question. And then I guess when you educate people, sometimes you don't need just to give them the class and give them all the reasons, but when they see you doing things and that these things that you're doing make sense, okay? And perhaps you share some examples here and there. So I know sometimes sustainability, now that we are talking about sustainability, people that reside in cities, we are constantly stressed. And let's say that our health starts to decline substantially for some reason. There is no ways to absorb the pollution because nature is not present, correct? The levels of noise pollution as well, the hectic lifestyle as well. There was this time where, actually I remember reading these architectural books when I was doing my master's, cities are making us ill. But it turns out that it's not only cities, like the urban space when you walk around, also buildings. Okay, so there was this phenomenon of ill buildings. right? That you could immediately, if you spend too much time, you know, I think we mentioned it roughly at some point outside the podcast that you mentioned about if you block a window view, what's the purpose of a window, right? Yeah. So what it happens is that you even have buildings that are designed without windows. Right? And whatever is outside, perhaps if you live in front of a highly transited road or high speed.
Sensitive zones.
Yes, the sound. Yes. And that can also affect your productivity, we know. So if you work in an office where you don't have a window view, that can definitely affect you in the long term, cognitively.
So actually maybe we are not stressed with the work. It could be like the environment.
Correct.
That get us
and
to
this
be
is
stressed.
a great finding. Is not a great thing at all, but it was a great finding, especially in the area of architecture and design, because we began to be more conscious about what's going on. We began to question what can we do as architects and urban designers to really discuss about health and well-being integrated into the design. Pretty much bringing awareness that, okay, we can artificially design the spaces to make them more habitable and healthier for people. And there are even, now there are certifications that the buildings can go through. And for instance, one is called WELL, and you design the spaces following certain criteria, so it wouldn't affect negatively the health and well-being of people inside the buildings. It's a big step forward. But for me, the question has always been, what about nature? These are the man-made environments, and we specialize in that, which is brilliant. But let's not forget that we are also facing big challenges, global challenges, correct? So climate change and all the consequences that we might be already facing.
External factors.
Correct. Right? So we can use technology, of course. We can make all of these spaces habitable for all of us, better for our health and well-being. But what's going on, what's happening with the other world out there, okay? With the natural world. This has been discussed for a really long time, okay? And it's something that we call biophilic design. Initially, I'm not sure if these buildings were in Singapore, like the Royal Park, for instance, they were designed with that idea in mind, but it now epitomizes what biophilic design is, which is pretty much taking inspiration from nature and try to replicate or mimic those natural patterns into our buildings, okay? To the point that we can even integrate natural elements into the space. So we make an artificial man-made design space. We design it in such a way that it intertwines or coexists with living organisms besides human beings, right? So taking inspiration from the notion of biophilic design, I think Singapore has been, many architectural firms in Singapore have pretty much set up the way on how we can move forward. It does come with challenges, we know, so it's a progression, but the fact that Singapore started it long ago, it has shown that the challenges might come, but we, as designers, we still need to figure out how to really design spaces that are not only human-centric, but how can we circumvent the idea of domination over nature, and instead, how can you design for the well-being of humans and nature? Yeah. And just to link it back to the other topic we were discussing, how we can help other generations to be more sustainable and understand a little bit more and benefiting from nature for that purpose, right? Keeping that sort of engagement, definitely also helps elderly to avoid any risk of being depressed, for instance, or isolated, so on and so forth. So the benefits are thousands of benefits we have. The benefits that we've seen also in other countries around the world. So it's not only Singapore that is implemented, but many other countries in the US, for instance, they do use this type of horticultural therapy with people that have gone through severe traumatic experiences. I know also in South America wonderful initiatives where people that have been victims of perhaps war or even more severe traumas like war. Yes, very traumatic events. Using these horticultural therapies does create a positive effect in people. It's scientifically been studied, and it's a progressive one. It's a process that is progressive. So as an educator, I'm always finding ways of how can you best transmit the message so it makes sense to us in a simple way. And one thing that I've noticed is that no matter what, no matter what field of knowledge you are, if you are in finances or architecture, engineering, communication, you name it, in our genetic composition, we have some sort of understanding of the importance of that work, the natural work, no matter what.
Rather than man over nature, man dominating, right, the nature of our built environment, the idea of coexistence, right?
Correct.
I think back to that, almost like a partner. So what can architects do, right, in that to coexist?
We read so much about it, and actually you find wonderful books about biophilic design and the patterns, and we talk about Heraclean motion and resiliency and changes. So all of these are concepts that we can use to design the spaces, taking into account. So for instance, if you want resilience and change, so you will design spaces with views where you can see the sun setting and moving and the light, right? And if you can locate in a specific way trees where the patterns, you can see them reflected on the floor or on the wall, and it brings you that like sense of motion going on there. And you can see the fractals of nature, right? Because I was explaining that nature has this fractal fluidity, we call it, and we have that same fractal fluidity that nature. Those same patterns are in us, in our cells, at the biological, microscopical level.
Like the Monstera cheese?
Yeah.
There was a time where all the the architect were looking for those Monstera. There's a lot of projects for the architect love the cheese. Is it because of that, so that it can kind of like the light can pass through and create certain kind of patterns?
You can design with that purpose in mind. So this is proper biophilic design. Okay, so you can integrate water elements as well. So it's not only the sound, but the moving patterns and the reflection of it.
They do that. If I'm not wrong, it's Bencoolen. Was it Bencoolen? Circle line, super high ceiling, and there's a water.
Correct.
So
you
the
can,
light
you
and
can.
the wind
Because
blow,
our subways are really deep.
Correct,
So you
correct.
feel like you're in a cave.
Yeah, you can feel claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Correct. And actually, this is a good point that you raised, because we know that Singapore pretty much is growing underground as well, right? So there are several proposals in how we can integrate nature into those kind of environments, so to avoid people feeling claustrophobic and so on and so forth. So one thing that is also very important to mention here is that there is also some sort of consideration that we need to have towards the organic life we are integrating in those artificial environments, right? Because many times they don't thrive, right? So when the space is heavily curated, when the conditions that you give to help these organisms emerge, they are not conducive for ecological or biological diversity and their sort of coexistence within that biological realm, then what we are doing is just replacing over and over these environments, because they wouldn't last for that long. So it's not anymore that you are integrating organic life so you can coexist, right? And it's helping you being aware of nature and is creating that sort of symbiotic relationship, but you're just using it in a very commodifying way. Like, as you mentioned the word, very dominative, right? Like, just bring it here and force it into the space. And I think that's where we need to look forward to in terms of biophilic design and how, back to your question, sorry it took me so long to answer. But yes, that's the point we need to look towards too. Because even this week I thought, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful that architecture students learn about biology as well? Because to me, it seems that the way to go is definitely using or integrating the principles of biophilic design, correct? Or how to integrate nature in our artificial environments. But for architecture students, it seems that you just kind of draw
the structure urban.
No, you just draw a tree and this is how it is, and someone else come
so
and picks
they
up.
don't specify the type of tree.
Oh, if you study landscape architecture, you might do,
Yes.
but an architecture student might not, right?
Yeah.
Because you will give it to the specialist, and I'm not saying, yeah, of course, you can then hire and work with a landscape architect. That's brilliant, but at least as an architect or as a designer, that you're interested in biophilic design, if you know some fundamental principles of the biological principles of how you can create a thriving ecosystem, right? That is not only for humans that you're designing, right? You are not designing for humans anymore. I'm sorry, we live in a diverse environment, right? So we have an urban space that is multi-species. I have people calling me hippie. Oh no, Diana, you're too hippie. And yeah, I was like, why? Because I love nature, I respect nature. I just finding all ways that I can harm less nature. Back then, I'm talking about like 15 years ago, and now we see, yeah, it took a little long, but it's out there now. Is here. So that's what I want in my students. If I can shortcut so I can plant that seed, then I think for me that's great.
Yeah, I love that. Plant the seed and see it flourish, and then take action.
Yeah, and Singapore is a perfect context to do so, I think. And also we have younger generations pretty much in tune with that.
Exactly, because Gen Z are very sustainability, concerned, about how the earth or the future generations, for example,
Correct.
or they keep on talking about mental stress, they want to have a work-life balance and so on and so forth. So we understand that environment that you are in will affect you mentally too, right? So I think that's amazing to know about that. We learn a lot from you.
Thank you. I also learned from you guys. Thank you for the awesome questions, though. A little bit challenging, some of them.
Most of the time it's always
amazing.
challenging. the brain, the guys.
So it seems to me that coexistence should not be just an abstract idea, right? It should be something that we ourselves, whether you're an architect or urban planner, designer, we need to know and get ourselves involved in. So I understand that you're also involved in Jane Goodall Institute Singapore. So maybe you can share with us some of the ground up initiatives and they are doing how do we really get ourselves?
Why do you join? Or
Why do you
what
join?
makes you love this Jane Goodall?
I guess, why Jane Goodall, why I started with them. It just brings me back to a fundamental question personally as a human being. Like it's almost like an existential sort of journey for me, right? Which is how to bring more awareness over the natural environment to the world. I'm not driven by economic gains in that sense. I'm just driven by educating and finding ways in which we can communicate or perhaps inspire changes in people. So can you become more aware about that environment? When I started being more associated with Jane Goodall, with their programs and helping out with a few things, they helped me to be even more aware of the microsystems, the microorganisms. And in my case, I always been very, of course, focused on my career, my area of expertise. So how do we integrate plants into buildings? How do we integrate harmoniously nature in the urban fabric so the trees don't suffer or the biodiversity doesn't suffer also. And with them, it was really interesting how they sparkle that sense of awareness towards every minute living being. I'm not only talking about plants, I'm also talking about wildlife. And to me, Jane Goodall epitomizes such a thing, blending this existential part that nature plays with architectural design, urban studies, and education. It helps me to kind of create a full circle in my life, so I don't lose sight of what is really important, I would say, because we're talking about how we dominate nature, right? And believe me, architectural design and engineering design, it's all about that. Like we of course, I'm not demonizing it, so please just take that thought off your head. But perhaps we need a more gentle approach, especially when it comes to the natural environment.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Diana, for today's sharing. I think it's a message of hope. It's inspiring. We have heard how architecture, design, urban planning, right, can actually play a very key role, right, in ensuring, right. I think not just, of course, turning Singapore into a city in nature, but I think also strengthening our social fabrics.
Correct.
We have heard how nature nourishes our soul, how it can bring generations together, right? And I think that is really very inspiring to hear that. And thank you, Dr. Diana, for today's inspiring and insightful session. I think we learned a lot from you. Yeah, so folks, if you like today's episode and what Dr. Diana has shared, so Dr. Diana will be part of a panel discussion during Singapore Design Week on the 5th of October, organized by Creativeans and Jane Goodall Institute, Singapore. Okay, so we hope to see you there. Please register. And if you like today's episode, please also remember to like and subscribe. We will see you at the next one. Thank you.